I appreciate the compliments that Alan gave me. I was just thinking the other day, and I get to, well, really, every day I get to sit and listen. So this is kind of opposite day for me because I'm standing and talking. But as people tell me stories, I hear a lot of similarities in stories and a lot of patterns that are kind of overflow into the work that I do. And I notice we save our best compliments for eulogies. What?
Are you muted still? Sorry, I just want to make sure you weren't muted still.
Technology. Remember, I'm a 50-year-old, so don't understand. You know, some of the patterns that I see is we save the best compliments for eulogies after someone dies. We use our best manners on strangers and not the family and the people we live with. And, you know, we pass up on compliments until we actually are deprived of something. We don't really appreciate, think of things until that something is gone or that's passed. So it's important to me that we live intentional lives. And intentionality, I don't know, I feel that sometimes my words work better in crossword puzzles than they do in just regular language. But being intentional means we're purposeful. We're doing something intentionally. We're doing something that we know is good and know has a good outcome, not something that just comes easy or natural, but something that sometimes is a little harder to, and takes more discipline to do. One of the things that I wanted to address, some people wonder, why do we have a counselor on staff? I mean, what role does that fellow play? In fact, I didn't get my degree in Bible. I did go to a Christian college, and I took 4 semesters of Bible, but no major in that. I have more business background than I do counseling. So what am I doing at the church building? Well, my field is in counseling. And if you think about the different realms of life that we're involved in, and thinking about health, we take a look at our physical health. You know, we want to be healthy, we want to be active, we want to have joints that last a long time, and hopefully we will outlive our joints. We don't want to be wore out old people, right? So physical health is important. We pay attention to how much sleep we get, what kind of foods we eat, and the type of rest that we get. Also, and all of y'all show that this is important, that our spiritual life is important. And obviously, there's a bleed over of benefits to each. We're more likely to feel like praising and being more gracious and have more gratitude when we're feeling well. If we don't feel well, our spiritual life suffers as well. But another component of our existence is our mental and emotional life. Because we're constantly experiencing changes in our life. When you take a look at the big book that I use for diagnoses, that's plural for a diagnosis, about half that book has to do with adjustment disorders, because we're always shifting from one stage of life to another. When we shift, there's changes that come with that. And so these adjustments that take place, you know, we don't get to stay in one place very long. About the time that we get comfortable and learn the rules to whatever it means to be a junior high kid, then you're thrown into high school. You learn the rules of how that's supposed to work and operate and be successful, and then you're thrown into college, or from college into the real world, or from the real world into marriage, or from marriage into now parenting, and from parenting to the empty nest, from the empty nest to retirement. And we're always changing. There's always some adjustment that's going on. And that may not affect our physical life very much, going from high school to college, aside from maybe feeling, maybe the freshman 15 that they talk about. But probably you're going to be affected as far as stress goes, because all of a sudden the work is harder, there's a lot more to go through, and so there's attention that needs to be given in this area. And I appreciate the church recognizing here's a good role that we can take on and address the issues that come up in our church as well as in the community. the good thing about my job is that I'm available to this church, but I'm also available to the community. So people that don't maybe know about God and Jesus, that have maybe relationship problems, they may come in and say, we don't really have a faith background, but we heard that this counseling is affordable. So the main reason we came here is because it fits well in our budget. But at the same time, we really don't want to get preached to, and we really don't want to, have religion shoved down our throats, but we'd like to talk to you. Will that work? Certainly. And every now and then I'll say, this is really interesting what you're talking about. There's this ancient Hebrew proverb that says this. And, if they hear ancient Hebrew, that sounds kind of interesting and may pique their curiosity. If I said, well, in Proverbs chapter 5, verse 29, it says, then they might close off. So it's a great avenue to be able to reach people that I wouldn't ordinarily see from the community and possibly have never walked in our building before. So it's a good opportunity to address some of those needs from that particular standpoint. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about these different realms of our existence, and it's probably one that you're familiar with. And it's found in Mark chapter 12, verse 30. And it talks about how we show love to God. And it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your mind, and with your strength. So, this is the participation part here. I'm counting on y'all. Allie already looks poised to jump in here. Hopefully Tatum's really ready to go. If we were going to take a look at these components, which circles do you think this would fit in? If we were to say heart, physical, that would be the blood pumper, right? But that's probably not what the Bible's probably not talking about, the blood pumper, the emotional part. Is that okay? Yeah, because we kind of use that word figuratively for from your heart, you show love, you show kindness, those kind of things. Okay? Is that all right? So we'll say we got one check here for emotional. Okay, love the Lord your God with all of your soul. Spirit, does that sound right? Everybody good with that? All right. Love the Lord your God with all your mind. Mental, okay, here we go. And with all your strength. Okay, all right. So we can see that in this gospel account, Jesus is directing these people. This is how you love your God, with your whole being, all parts of you. Now, I like the fact that the church sees the importance of the mental and emotional part. My counseling field is just now starting to embrace the spiritual end of things. It's really only been about 20 years that they've been saying, hey, we really need to address the needs of the whole person. And to do that, we need to involve the spiritual aspect in counseling as well. So that's kind of nice, except for most of it sounds very neutral and kind of new age, a non-specific type of entity talking about spirituality. Luckily, I'm not bound, as I would be in a regular counseling profession, to a generic term. I can talk about God and Jesus and not get in trouble with anybody. So that's good. Now, the other end of things, sometimes people don't like to open up and be honest. I mean, not everybody's office has a steeple on it. And so sometimes that reins people's behavior in, but eventually they start to feel comfortable with how things are going. Now, a lot of how we deal with life and how we deal with our problems has a lot to do with our perspective. Does anybody know what perspective is? That's kind of how we see things. Okay, Jess? Yeah, point of view, how we see things. If Jesse's dad, Darren, we know how tall Darren is, right? Let's say Darren being tall, and let's say, Logan, you're not as tall as Darren, right? But if y'all were both describing who Alan is, Logan would say, he's a tall guy. Alan is a tall guy. And Darren would say, hey, he's an average-sized guy. Because they have two different points of view, two very different perspectives. It doesn't mean one's right, one's wrong, but we'll have a different point of view. And a lot of times in counseling, we have to address perspective, our point of view, how we filter things. how we see things. There's an old saying that if you're a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. If you're a hammer, or if you're a screwdriver, that'd be a funny joke. But anyway, so perspective is very important. I'm going to give you counseling boiled down in one short, easy to digest system. A leads to B, which leads to C. Makes sense, right? You learned that in kindergarten, didn't you? Okay, well, how that looks in counseling is people experience events. If some action, some event, something takes place, they view that event, right? And they have some belief system about what that event means. And at the end, there's going to be an emotional consequence. One of my favorite stories for explaining this is back when I used to work in the paint store. This is the profession I had before being a counselor. Worked in a paint store, and we had, in the summertime, it was a busy time. And so it was important to have some help to work in the warehouse. So we usually hired young, strong men because everything there required a lot of lifting and moving around. The big buckets, 5-gallon buckets, y'all perhaps have had those at some of your work projects. They weigh about 60 pounds. Every bucket comes into the store white. 80% of them leave a tinted color. But for them to be that color means they have to be picked up and moved 6 to 7 times. So if your store is putting out over 500 gallons per day, you got people that are lifting a lot of weight, carrying a lot of stuff. Warehouse is never air conditioned. So we're hiring this guy from college who's leaving his air conditioned college classroom and is now going to spend the summer with us in an unair conditioned warehouse, lifting buckets, 60 pounds each, all day long, and it's going to be really hot and really uncomfortable, and he's not going to be hanging out with his friends and having fun. But this guy says, this is great, I need a job, this is going to be really good. So he shows up, he's working along, doing a good job for us, been there a couple of weeks, and one day he comes in, he goes to the warehouse, it's right after Memorial Day, and the plant was shut down, so we didn't get a shipment that week. So the next week, a double shipment. Lots of paint, lots of lifting, lots of stuff to do. We're busy. And I walk back in the warehouse and I see his name was Jonathan. And Jonathan is sitting in the back of the warehouse. And he looks up at me and he gives me this sneer. He just looks and kind of glares at me. I thought, wow, that's not, I don't know this kid well, but that's not who I thought I hired. This was always an easygoing, nice guy. Well, a couple more times I go in the back, and same thing, gives me this sneer. And I start to get this feeling, because I've had people quit on me before, and quit without notice. We are getting into our busiest season. This kid's going to quit. He said, yeah, job sounded good. Sounded good when he didn't have any money. He's already got one paycheck under his belt. Now he's thinking, oh, it's not that much fun anymore. He's going to quit. Busiest season. I'm going to be stuck with no help. I'm going to be doing his job. I'm going to be doing my job. And guess how I was starting to feel? Pardon? Overwhelmed? Okay. That would be a nice term. The way I was really feeling was angry. I was starting to get mad and I was starting to get irritated. So if we were looking at this model, the A would be what? The thing that I saw when I looked at him was what? That sneer, that glare. And when I saw that glare, I started thinking, he's going to quit. That was my B, my belief system. And at the end, what was the emotion I was feeling? Angry. So I decided I'm going to go back there. I'm going to talk to Jonathan. Sorry, Jonathan, I don't mean to be making you nervous over here using harsh tones with your name. I'm going to talk to Jonathan. We're going to have it out. I'm going to lay the cards on the table. And so I go back there, and as I'm going back there, the closer I get, that sneer starts to soften. And he smiles. And I'm like, why is he smiling? He was sneering when I was across the room. Now he's smiling. So, hey, what's going on? Nothing. You need any help? No, I'm fine. You need us to move a fan back here so it'll be cooler? Oh, no, keep them where they're at. They're fine. Well, I'm confused now. I don't know what's going on. About that time, somebody from the front yells, hey, Russell, you got a phone call. Okay, I'm looking up there. Okay. Well, Jonathan's looking at him too, like this. And I said, hey, you wear glasses? No, I wear contacts. I lost one. Okay, all right. Now, the rest of the day, I still saw that same sneer, but I had a totally different belief system about what was behind that sneer, right? And because I had a different belief about what was going on, guess what else was different?
Your emotional consequence.
The consequence, yeah, the emotion. In fact, I saw that sneer the rest of the day and I thought it was funny. How did I go from angry to funny? I didn't change the sneer, right? I didn't change the sneer. What changed?
You knew why he was doing it?
Exactly. What I knew was, what was different was my belief system. I was able to challenge my thinking that originally took place. Sometimes that's what my job is to challenge belief systems. Why do we feel this way? What's the thinking behind it? Our thoughts lead to our emotions. We need to make sure we have our thoughts in the right place. How about, Andrew, could we jump over to Romans chapter 4, verse 8? This is a verse that means a whole lot to us. Maybe you've heard the term mind control. Mind control. I remember when I was in college, people say, what's your major in? I said, I'm a psychology major. And they go, oh man, are you going to read my mind? Are you going to do mind control? Or are you going to hypnotize me while I'm not watching? That's not the one I'm looking for. Okay, how about the slide after the slide that I was on a while ago there, Andrew?
Slide after the slide.
Yeah. Back to the power. Yeah, there we go. Finally, brothers, and this is Paul talking to the Romans, the church in Rome, and he's giving some good advice about living life. And this is what he said. Finally, brothers and sisters, was whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, what should you do with them? You should think about them. That he's talking about directing our thoughts, talking about being intentional, talking about where we go. Okay, now if we go backwards one to Dr. Daniel Amen. Or Dr. Daniel, I left his name off. His last name is Amen, like the end of a prayer. So it's kind of neat, easy to remember. He's a very interesting neurologist. One of the things I like best about Dr. Amen is that as smart as he is, he can write literature where guys like me can understand what's going on. One of the things that he's been doing work in, and he's kind of a pioneer in this field, is called SPECT imaging. It's a way to look at the brain and see what it's doing. You can see the areas that are very active and the areas that aren't working. He can look at someone that's suffered alcoholism for many years and see how alcohol has affected the brain long term. He can take a look at things like Alzheimer's, dementia, even a stressed out brain he can take a look at. There was this one time after his father had died, he found himself, he was very close to his father, and a few months after that, he noticed he kept losing his car keys. He kept forgetting appointments. He kept showing up late for events. He thought, I know this is grief. Surely my brain has stopped working. Well, he did a SPECT image of his own brain and found out just the opposite, that his brain was overworking. He was trying to deal with the event that took place. The auditory part was very busy, listening for any cues that might sound like his dad's voice. The visual aspect was very acute to see anything that reminded him of his dad. If he'd be driving, he was looking for models of car like his dad's were. So very involved in brain specting. One of the things he wanted to do is work with a group of Shinto monks. These are Buddhist monks, and part of their daily ritual is to spend a couple of hours in intentional meditation. So where they're sitting down and thinking about something positive to do. And so he hooked up an EEG. That's different than what Brody's getting. Brody's getting EKG to take care of his heart. He hooked him up to EEGs to measure brain waves. And what he found in this time period, which was no big surprise, while they were meditating, their left frontal lobe of their brain was very active. And that's the part of the brain that positive thinking takes place in. It's also the part of the brain that does creative problem solving, and the part of the brain that's interested in art. So The left frontal lobe was very busy during that time of meditation. Well, no big surprise, right? I mean, they are meditating, and it is intentional, and it's directed towards something positive. But what he found was that the rest of the day, as they went about their activities, everything else they processed, whether it was work-related or stress-related, or even something more mundane and boring, it was processed through that left frontal lobe. It was a lot more positive. That momentum of being positive just kept going because of that. Now, I'm going to let you in on a secret that's going to benefit you for the next few years, all right? And this has to do a little bit with test anxiety and scoring better. This technique will earn you an extra 5% on your test grades. Does that sound okay? Be pretty interesting. It could be the difference between a B and an A, right?
Right.
And you might want to take out a notepad and take notes, because it's a complicated technique. When you take a test, you should always smile. Yeah, isn't that neat? All you need to do is smile. There is a communication between the muscles in your face, because these muscles only work when things are positive and things are going well, or you're experiencing something pleasurable. And so even though the test is not positive and not pleasurable, these muscles are telling your brain to open up that left frontal lobe. Let's let that creativity flow. Let's get the problem solving going better than it would normally. Because we talked about the left frontal lobe. You want to know what the right frontal lobe does? Worries, stresses out, feels negative thoughts. So by communicating to the brain with our physical muscles are communicating to our emotional brain that this is a pleasant experience, so we're more likely to be more creative and engage more in problem solving. So, is that good? All right, we got something from tonight. If nothing else, that's good. You can use that for. So, when we're looking at how we filter things, our reality has a lot to do with our experiences and our filters, where we come from, how we see things. But is perspective always reality? Just because we see something a certain way, does that mean that's the way it really is? But what if two people see something differently? Logan sees Alan as a tall guy, Darren sees him as average. Does that mean one of them's wrong? No, different of perspective. And sometimes the perspective we might have is unhealthy. But when we're looking at some of the tough questions in life, we get challenged with, one of the big ones I deal with is, what is good and what is bad? Because people come to my office because things have gotten bad. Rarely does someone come in and say, I just want to share good news. Or I want to tell you what great things are going on in my life. Sometimes they do, because we started off talking about that. But many times people will say, this is the hardest time in my life. This is the biggest struggle I've ever encountered. This is my low, my lowest low. And then along the way, it may be weeks later, it may be months later, they'll look back and say things like, that was a time of really intense growth. I grew as a person, I grew closer to God, whatever that is. And so we go back and say, okay, well, you said that was the worst time in your life back then. What do we call it now? Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't really say it's all bad, because a lot of good came from it. So a lot of times we have to address labels like questions like what's good and what's bad. Or people talk about happiness. How do I get it? How do I keep it? How do I attain it? Because there's some ways that we chase after happiness that we find out later, oh, that really doesn't make me happy anymore. Or maybe it makes my life kind of miserable. People will ask, what's my purpose in this life? That's a challenge that people my age can ask and struggle with. Those are important questions. And even questions like, how do I live a life that matters? I want a hashtag, right? Hashtag because my life matters. Hashtag Russell matters. That'd be great, right? How do I get there? What do I do to obtain that? So we will have a couple of different routes that we can go. We can go the route that culture is pushing us towards, what culture tells us. Culture has a perspective. Remember we're talking about perspectives? But also, we've got a biblical perspective on how to live life and how to address these questions. If we were going to choose in this class between which one would be a better choice, culture's perspective or a biblical perspective, which answer do you guess I'm going to lean towards? Yeah, towards the biblical perspective. That'd be a good answer for a church class, right? And sometimes we say, okay, yeah, that's great for class, but how's that really supposed to work? I mean, some of this stuff was written 2,700 years ago. Is that really applicable? Does that still fit? I can tell you from personal experience, because I tried the opposite too many times, that the biblical perspective works. So back to our question of, say, what is good and what is bad? From a cultural perspective, next slide, please, Andrew. What is good versus what is bad? Culture will tell us what is good is what I want, right? We want what we want. And what's bad is what I don't want. But what we find from a biblical perspective is good and bad happens in our lives. Job said, how can I accept good from God and then deny him when he gives me bad? I'll praise him in both. So from the biblical perspective, good can bring you, good is the things that bring you closer to God, that brings about personal growth. And those may not be the good things in your life, or the things you would call good. It might be the hard times. It might be the hardship. James chapter 1 says, count it all joy when trials come. Are we good okay on time?
Yeah, you got about 4 minutes.
Okay, all right. The next question, where do I find true happiness? Culture tells us the simple answer to being happy is just getting more. Doesn't matter what it is. Money, you get more. Fame, you get more. Power, get more. There's an old joke. There's two men. One's a millionaire and the other one has 6 kids. Which one's happier? The man with 6 kids, because the millionaire will always want more. Okay, all right, I'll save the jokes for
Should have said
that.
8 kids.
Should have been 8 kids. Mr. Middleton. There you go. Okay, so the culture tells us the answer to being happy is just getting more. From a biblical perspective, it's the things in life that bring us closer to God. We find happiness, lasting happiness, through God. What's my purpose in life? Culture will tell us to be successful, to achieve, to overcome, to make this a better place. And those are okay goals. Those are good goals as long as the end result is that we give honor through those actions and through those efforts, that those actions are there to glorify God. And then finally, how do I live a life that matters? From culture, again, is to accomplish goals, achieve success, pursue dreams. And those are all good things too. But we find that where we get lasting success is when we're a servant, when we serve others. The relationships that we form are really the things that matter in life. You know, you've heard the story about the man walking through the graveyard and said, I never saw a tomb that said, I wish I could have spent more time at work. I wish I'd have had just a little more money. You know, we enter this world in the context of a family. We die surrounded by our family. And relationships are the constant all the way through. So a lot of the work that I do deals with relationships and making them healthy and making them work. And a lot of it has to do with a servant-centered or servant orientation, how we think about those in our family and those that we work with. We had planned on some questions at the end, and we may not have time for them. But next week, we're going to be talking about anxiety and depression. And as y'all are thinking about those, if you would, just write down some questions you may have. Did we want to do that tonight or Sunday? Or
Yeah, I'll explain to them once you just wrap up, and we'll sit together up there for a little bit.
Okay,
We have
all
about
right.
5 minutes we can devote to that.
I'm wrapped up.
Okay.
All right.